Goku is a fun character, but a very difficult one to try and play out because he is a great example of a static character arc. Now, for those of you who don't know, there are 3 different types of character arcs that are typically used in storytelling. And it's not only limited to these 3, but they are the 3 most common. It is the negative character arc, where a character goes through an arc that causes them to constantly fall into more self-destructive behavior. The positive character arc, which is where they have to constantly learn lessons in order to be able to overcome negative behaviors. And then there is the static character arc. And the static character arc is a very interesting one because it is one where the character does not change. But in order to keep the story interesting, they instead end up changing the characters around them. And having a main character with a static character arc is something that is difficult to do, and I think Goku is a great example of it. And so a lot of people want to play him in their games, but it is really difficult to play this type of character for one particular reason, and that's that D&D just really isn't a main character type of game. And so having a static character arc is really difficult to do, but not impossible. So let's talk about it.
It's me, Goku! It's me, Goku! It's me, Goku! It's me, Goku! It's me, Goku!
One of the main reasons people want to play a character like Goku is because it is very fun to imagine this idea of a character who constantly always wants to improve their abilities and become stronger, always wants to overcome the next odd, and can convince other people around them to be inspired just by their ability to do this. But in D&D, you just can't do that so well because Dragon Ball is set up essentially to have this idea of, well, mostly one-on-one fights. You don't typically see a lot of people in D&D having this one-on-one fight where it's, hey, I want to see if I'm stronger than you. Let's go at it and learn our abilities. No, in combat, it's the whole party. That's how the game is based. And so inherently, the very structure of how Dragon Ball is based doesn't work for tabletop games, making it incredibly difficult to play this type of character. Not only that, a lot of people want to play Goku because he seems like he can overcome all odds, but D&D is based to have a combat scenario where everybody has to work together. You can't really test, hey, am I stronger than you one-on-one, because it just doesn't work that way. So how do you do it? Well, there's a few different things. One particular one that I would recommend is always have your character try and single out the most powerful character in the other combat. Whether it is somebody who is much more powerful than the rest, a warrior, or some sort of guardian for the rest of them. Maybe it's the boss and all the minions are around and you go straight for the boss. Have your character always want to try and compare themselves to the biggest person in the room and fight them that way. It's not necessarily at one-on-one, but it does create more of that vibe of this character who just wants to prove that they are stronger, who just wants to know their weaknesses, who just wants to improve their abilities, and so they always go for the person who will try their abilities the most. And that does create a much more interesting scenario. However, it does very potentially screw over the rest of your party. I mean, consider you're just a fighter trying to get to the main boss all the way on the other end of the field, but you run past every single one of the minions, probably taking opportunity attacks while you do so. And at the end of your turn, after you've dashed and action surged, you're barely about to get to him. You should be leaving it to the more ranged people to try and attack him while you're protecting them from the minions coming in. And so, making sure that your party is on board with this type of character is an incredibly important factor when it comes down to it. You have to know that they are okay with you playing this type of character. And it's very difficult to do this because there's a lot of things that can get in your way. One way you can help with this is optimize your character to be able to accomplish this stuff. Make sure they have spells such as Misty Step, or they have the mobile feat. See if you can get items like the Boots of Speed in order to make sure that your character will be able to get to who they need to go. It is not a great character when you have developed them to always want to fight the biggest person in the room, but they spend several rounds getting there, therefore screwing over everybody else. If you're gonna play this, set yourself up for success.
You can destroy planets, but you can never destroy what I am, friend. I am the hope of the universe. I am the answer to all living things that cry out for peace.
Additionally, your party's going to have to understand how they can work with you on this, and I actually do have a somewhat unusual example to explain. The game Deltarune is a sequel, spiritual successor. It has something to do with Undertale. It's very complicated and not really relevant to this video. The point is this is an RPG game where you collect characters and fight in battles, like many JRPGs go. However, this one's a little bit different because there's a particular character named Susie, and Susie is without a doubt the most powerful when it comes to dealing a lot of damage in combat. It is what she's based around. However, your other 2 characters don't necessarily want to kill everybody, but they have to work around the fact that Susie is going to take the attack action every single time. Because of this, the game becomes much less about trying to optimize everything, but instead working around what you know is going to happen. You know Susie's going to attack, and sometimes you can work with that well. You intentionally use it to make sure that she attacks in the right areas. And sometimes you're just going out of your way to try and help the enemies escape Susie's wrath, calling out to them to warn them about her attacks or telling them how to dodge. And that's the thing, if you're going to have a character who is always 100% of the time going to go for the largest person in the room, the rest of the party, if they're on board with it, and again, I can't emphasize enough that you need to talk with them about it, will understand that they're gonna have to work with that. If there's a large person in the room, your character will go get to them. And it works really well if you optimize your character to be very good at doing that. Say you're a fighter who is amazing at doing damage and just wants to constantly go fight the enemy, and the wizard sees that there's a giant ogre at the end of the room and knows you're going to go attack him. Well, you could waste a few rounds doing that, but the wizard knows you're going to do it, knows that you're really good at what you're doing, and so the wizard will take a turn to haste you so that you can get there sooner and deal more damage. It works that way and makes it a lot more effective and makes the rest of the party feel like they're doing well. Goku will always attack the largest enemy. He will always want to face them one-on-one. And in D&D, while that doesn't really work, you can work with it and make your team understand where you're trying to go with it. And that's one of the most important things you need to understand. I talked before about this static character arc, and yet I still mention many times that Goku constantly wanted to improve himself. But you have to understand, he never wanted to improve anything about himself character-wise, just his strength. And I think in D&D, while yes, you can go down that route, I think it's a lot more interesting to give it a little bit more spice, to allow your character to actually grow from this character trait of always wanting to fight the biggest person in the room. Because let's be honest, if you're a level 5 fighter and you want to go to fight a monster that has a way higher CR than you, you're probably going to get bodied. That's just how D&D works. It's not built around the story structure that Dragon Ball is, where you're always going to be able to overcome the odds. The point of D&D is to work with your party. And so you'll have to understand that. Your character is probably going to have to learn a lesson about the fact that they can't always go and do that by themselves. It doesn't mean they have to stop trying to fight the biggest enemy and stop trying to improve their combat abilities. It just means they're gonna have to be a little bit more understanding that their actions have consequences to others. Yes, they can get bodied and suddenly they're down and oh wow, that was such a great fight and I learned so much about my weaknesses, but now your party has to deal with the consequences of that. And that is something that does happen occasionally in Dragon Ball. Unfortunately, Dragon Ball also has Vegeta, who is basically just synonymous with Goku's power and can always come in to clean up, typically. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult. But in D&D, you're not typically going to have that. But maybe you do have a relationship like that. Maybe you are a fighter and you have a barbarian that acts as your Vegeta. That works just fine and is pretty interesting and fun to do, but you have to be aware of those things and not screw over your party because of them. And truthfully, the last thing I can really recommend is really focusing on the humble aspect of Goku. I think that is one of the most fascinating character traits about him, and I think it is a very fun one to explore in D&D. A character who is insistent on growing stronger, who's incredibly powerful, but is always willing to learn and improve and grow and always willing to accept feedback. I think that's very important and can create a very fresh sense of air compared to the other types of characters that try to follow this archetype. Usually they'll be incredibly arrogant and cocky and always rush foolhardy forward, much like Vegeta, which I will be visiting Vegeta if people like this video. But for now, we're talking about Goku and his humble nature, almost an ignorant nature, but his humble nature is one of the most interesting things, and I think it can be very fun to explore in D&D. If you want to hear about how to play an alchemist, I have a video right here for that. Go out and make a great character.